Hello, welcome back. We are going to continue reading the Royals. This next chapter, I have not even peeked ahead at, so I have not the slightest clue what is happening in it. Yes. Let's continue. Royal weddings invigorate the monarchy. With all their... Timmy's toy under my foot. With all of their pageantry, they pump energy into the ancient rituals. They provide an epic pageant that stirs emotions. The romantic procession of a princess bride in a glass coach drawn by prancing horses to an enchanted life of happily ever after has no equal outside fairy tales. The crash of military drums, the blare of trumpets, and the roar of cheering crowds entrance the country like a shower of shooting stars. Swept up in the excitement, people unite to celebrate. And, not incidentally, businesses prosper as couturiers design hats and gowns, hotels book guests, restaurants cater parties, concessionaires produce gewgaws, and tourists spend free-handedly. Next to a coronation, nothing enchants the British like a royal wedding, and by 1960, the monarchy needed one. Reverence for the crown had slipped since the coronation, and traditional deference had been displaced by a new press curiosity. While still submissive to the palace, British reporters were finally disclosing how much it cost taxpayers to maintain royalty. The 1959 bill for upkeep of the royal yacht, Britannia, the 2 airplanes in the Queen's flight, Prince Philip's 2 Westland helicopters, the royal train, and the Queen's 4 royal Rolls-Royces exceeded $1 million. Reporters, far from being aggressive, were at least becoming more vigorous in covering the royal family. They still considered the 60-year-old Queen Mother above reproach, so they rarely wrote a negative word about her. But they singed the Queen a few times for her lackluster style, her hidebound courtiers, her shaky marriage, and her absent translation, philandering husband. There's a note. In 1959, Prince Philip made an extended trip to the Far East for almost 4 months. Again? Is this a different trip? The Daily Express ran a series of articles entitled "The Woman of the World with an Absent Husband." Philip had made so many trips out of England that upon his return, one newspaper carried the headline, "The Duke Visits Britain." Scathing. Okay. What this family needs next year is a wedding, the Queen Mother told her older daughter during the royal family's 1959 Christmas holidays. She had consulted the court calendars to find the right time to announce Princess Margaret's engagement. She had decided to give her younger daughter a full-blown wedding with all the royal flourishes. She knew that such a state occasion would revitalize the monarchy, but the Queen resisted. She feared that an extravagant wedding would only bring more criticism for spending taxpayers' money, and she did not want any more criticism. Still, she would never oppose her mother. Directly, there's a note. The Garter King of Arms, who was in charge of the sovereign's heraldic ceremonies, wrote to the Queen to ask whether the entire College of Arms should attend Princess Margaret's wedding. The Queen shuddered. Her private secretary responded, "While Her Majesty appreciated the loyal feeling of the officers at arms, they would understand that for obvious reasons she did not want the wedding to be made more of an occasion of state than was absolutely necessary." The Queen Mother and Princess Margaret's engagement announcement would not interfere with the national celebration plan for the birth of the Queen's 3rd child, expected in February. 10 years had passed since Princess Anne was born, and for the Queen, her current pregnancy would underscore the stability of her marriage and the commitment to her family. Significantly, the birth was timed to coincide with changing the name of the House of Windsor to the House of Mountbatten-Windsor. The Queen had proposed the change the previous year and suggested the announcement to include her husband's name be made shortly before the arrival of their 3rd baby. Despite his misgivings, the Prime Minister agreed to present the matter to his cabinet. The traditional monarchist objected when he broached the subject. But the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, pushed for the Queen's position, saying how important it was that her husband's name be validated. The Bishop of Carlisle cooperated by announcing that he did not like to think of any child born in wedlock being deprived of the father's family name. "Why should Her Majesty be different from any other married woman in the realm?" said the Prime Minister to his cabinet. "Why, indeed," snorted one Tory minister, who suspected the ambitions of that Battenberg buggerer, that is, Louis Mountbatten, had more to do with the name change than the Queen's personal wishes. The Deputy Prime Minister reported back to the Queen that several ministers suspected the strong hand of her unpopular husband. The Deputy then wrote a confidential memo to the Prime Minister about his meeting, saying, "The Queen stressed that Prince Philip did not know of the present decision, on which she had absolutely set her heart." So the Prime Minister went back to his cabinet and argued strenuously for the name change. The meeting was so acrimonious that papers dealing with the issue were not routinely released in 1990 under the 30-year rule. The subject, referred to within the cabinet as the Queen's affair, was so sensitive that the government ordered all pertinent documents to be kept sealed for an additional 20 years. After months of discussion, the Macmillan cabinet finally acceded to the Queen, and the new name was intricately fashioned by lawyers to accommodate her wishes without sacrificing historical continuity. There is a note. 3 years later, the Queen sadly accepted Macmillan's resignation as Prime Minister. In a letter, she thanked him for being my guide and supporter in international matters. "There have also been, I am afraid, a number of problems affecting my family, which must have occupied a great amount of your time. I should like to put on record my appreciation and gratitude for the unstinting care which you have taken in giving me your advice about them and helping me to find a solution." The hyphenated hybrid was confusing, but at least it gave the Queen and Prince Philip, not to mention Uncle Dickie, some small measure of satisfaction. On February 8, 1960, 11 days before the birth of Prince Andrew, Her Majesty announced, "While I and my children will continue to be styled and known as the House and Family of Windsor, my descendants, other than descendants enjoying the style, title, or attributes of Royal Highness, and the titular dignity of Prince or Princess, and the female descendants who marry, and their descendants shall bear the name Mountbatten Windsor." There is a note. The Sunday Express, one of Lord Beaverbrook's 3 newspapers, acidly congratulated Prince Philip when the Queen was about to give birth. "We are edified that he was able at last to leave his bird shooting at Sandringham and rejoin his wife at this exciting moment of her life." So he is giving himself a bad reputation because he's nowhere to be seen. The reaction was immediate and scathing. "Only 15 years after the Second World War against Germany," fumed a columnist for the Mirror, "we are abruptly informed that the name of Mountbatten, formerly Battenberg, is to be joined willy-nilly with the name of Windsor." Lord Beaverbrook, who owned the Daily Express, the Sunday Express, and the Evening Standard, blamed Mountbatten for pushing the Queen into a hyphenated name. Small wonder that Lord Mountbatten, whose devotion to his heritage is little short of fanatical, has for many years nursed a secret ambition that one day the name of the ruling house of Britain might be Mountbatten. He wrote, "The Queen could never see the name of Windsor, chosen by her grandfather, abandoned by the royal house. On the other hand, she sympathizes with her husband's feelings, and more particularly with the overtures of his uncle." The pompous Mountbatten was unperturbed. He was too busy celebrating. "My greatest happiness," he wrote in a letter to a friend, "is that the future royal children will be styled by the surname Mountbatten Windsor." In January 1960, Lord Mountbatten was staged an elaborate wedding for his younger daughter, Lady Pamela, to interior decorator David Nightingale Hicks. Mountbatten, oh yes, okay. Sorry, I'm just making connections in my head, who's who. Mountbatten invited all the crowned heads of Europe to make sure his daughter's wedding was as colorful and splendid as a royal wedding, prompting the press to describe him as almost royal. Future Prime Minister Harold Wilson described him as the shop steward of royalty, but his future son-in-law said that Mountbatten was insecure about his status. "The trouble with Dickie," said David Hicks, "was that in spite of his brilliant achievements, he never really knew who he was. He wasn't a member of the aristocracy. He had royal blood, but he wasn't fully accepted in the royal family. So he had a peculiar position that somehow left him very insecure. At first, Mountbatten had been dismayed that his daughter wanted to marry a commoner whom he considered far beneath her rank and station. For his own pride, Mountbatten wanted her to make a more illustrious marriage like her sisters. In 1946, he had persuaded his oldest daughter, Patricia, his acknowledged favorite, and the one for whom he had secured his title, to marry John Knatchbull. Oh, Joey. A strapping aristocrat who was Baron Brabourne. Okay, there's 2 notes. Mountbatten made no pretense about favoring his older daughter, Patricia. In 1953, he wrote her a letter saying, "You know how basically fond I am and always have been of Mummy. You know pretty well about my girlfriends, but none of them have had that magic something, which you have." I'm sorry. Does that not sound a little incestuous? I mean, my father would never, in the same breath, compare me to... I mean, he's with my mother, so... I just can't imagine a father saying, none of my girlfriends have that special something you have. Well, is that called being your daughter? Of course they don't have it. What a weird thing to say. That's like when Donald Trump says that if, what's her name? Ivana wasn't his daughter, he'd date her. And I find it weird when he says, I'm like, that's a weird thing for a dad to say. Ugh. Okay, let's read that again. You know pretty well about my girlfriends, but none of them have had that magic something which you have. That really makes me feel sick. Because it makes me think that there was something going on. He said that he was fond of his second child, Pamela, but the mainspring of my love for her is that she is your sister, and you love her. I'm sorry, something is really off with that. I mean, I already knew he was a perv. And no one's going to convince me that there's not something odd about that. I don't care what time, I don't care what decade this was said. That is strange. Not only is it strange for a father to say to his daughter, I've had all these girlfriends and you know about them, but none of them have had that special magic that you have. And, I love your sister because she's your sister and you love her. That's the hold she has on my affections, is that she's attached to you. Sir, please, step down. All right, the second note says, in 1946, Lord Louis Mountbatten was created Viscount Mountbatten of Burma. The next year, he was created Baron Romsey and Earl Mountbatten of Burma. Okay, I was like, did I just reread the same thing? Earl. So first it's Viscount and then it's Earl Mountbatten of Burma. With special remainder to his male heirs, and if no males, to his eldest daughter and her male heirs. This special Did I say reminder? I meant remainder. This special remainder, which allowed the title to pass to a female, was a rare concession by the monarch and granted only to military veterans with a record of distinguished war service. After the death of his wife in 1960, Mountbatten told his beloved daughter, Patricia, that he could not contemplate remarriage because he might have a son and disturb the plans he had made for her succession to his title. I don't know, guys. I'm just getting the ick. All right, what else? Okay, so anyway, Patricia, she marries the strapping aristocrat. Mountbatten was proud to claim this man as his son-in-law. He was not at all pleased with the prospect of an impecunious interior decorator. David's effeminate profession, plus his sexual preferences, both bothered Lord Mountbatten, said his former secretary, John Barat. But he recognized that Pammy was already 30 years old and on the cusp of spinsterhood. She had never been proposed to before, so he tried to accept the situation and make the best of it. Mountbatten's biographer, Philip Ziegler, agreed that Hicks was not Mountbatten's idea of the perfect son-in-law. An interior decorator, wrote Ziegler, was not what he would have chosen as a recruit for his family. Okay, there's another note. Mountbatten never developed deep affection for David Hicks and never accepted him as a surrogate son the way he did John Brabourne and Prince Philip. In 1972, 12 years after Hicks had married his younger daughter, Mountbatten wrote a letter to Philip in which he said, "Patricia and Pammy could not be sweeter or more affectionate daughters, but one does miss sons, so I am very lucky to have you and John, who are both so affectionate and nice to me." The English aristocracy are so two-faced about sexuality, said the writer Gwyn Robbins. It was absolutely hypocritical for Mountbatten, supposedly an old queen himself, or at least bisexual, or something else, in my opinion, to object to David Hicks. David never lied about himself or his boyfriends. He's always been quite open, and Pammy's very accepting of the men in his life. I came to know Pammy and David quite well when I worked with him on a book about decorating, said the writer. I dined with them many times, and there was always a beautiful young boy in attendance. Why do they say boy? Like, that is uncomfortable. Like, was it a man? Why would you say a beautiful young boy? It makes it sound like there's a teenage boy sitting with them. I mean, though I wouldn't be shocked. Seems the way the family goes. I met several of David's boyfriends and even interviewed them when I was writing his biography. There's a note. Mountbatten objected to his son-in-law's collaborating on a book. He phoned the writer and invited her for lunch. After a round of drinks, he said, Now, Miss Robbins, be a good girl and give me those tapes." She refused. "I couldn't," she said. "I had all of David's old gay boyfriends on tape, saying terrible things about him, and I didn't think it right to release them." Mountbatten threatened to sue her. She gave in. I couldn't find a man with his money, so he ended up going to his lawyer's office and burning the tapes. Hicks waited until after Lord Mountbatten's death to contact another writer, June Dukas, to resume work on his life story. "June can write whatever she likes, warts and all," he said in 1995. I don't give a damn. Well, that's a book I'd like to read. I do remember asking Pammy once how she could put up with all the men, and she said, "Gwen, if you had parents like mine, you can put up with anything. Besides, David is a very good father, and he's very nice to me. He runs the house, he orders the food, and he picks out all my clothes." Oh, so it's a lavender marriage. Is he bisexual or gay? It sounds like a lavender marriage to me, which, if I'm perfectly honest, doesn't sound too bad. David told me that he was on the verge of bankruptcy in 1959, continued the writer. A friend told him the only solution was to marry an heiress, but David didn't know any heiresses, so his friend invited him to a party to meet a few. That night, David was taking his mother to the movies. He was living with his mother at the time. He left her in the car for a few minutes while he ran into his friend's party to scout heiresses. Enter Lady Pamela Mountbatten. David didn't waste a second. "I saw an estate of £5 million walk through the door in white peep-toe shoes and the worst white pocketbook you've ever seen," he told me. "I immediately took her in my arms to dance and whispered, 'How many babies do you want?'" Naturally, Pammy, who had never been courted before and was in danger of never getting married, was enchanted. She told me she went home and told her mother, who was pleased for her but rather puzzled. "That's wonderful, darling," said Edwina, an heiress who inherited generations of heirlooms and never purchased furniture in her life. "But what's an interior designer?" After conferring with the Queen's courtiers, Lord Mountbatten chose January 13, 1960 for his daughter's wedding, because that was the only date that was convenient for the royal family. Despite the snow and slush of a winter blizzard, he insisted on a January wedding because he wanted to have the royal family there, said Barrett. And most of them attended, except for the Queen, who was in confinement at Sandringham for the birth of her third child. Mountbatten took charge of his daughter's wedding like an impresario, staging a theatrical production. He selected her royal bridesmaids, Princess Anne, the Queen's 10-year-old daughter, Princess Clarissa of Hesse, and Princess Frederica of Hanover. He summoned Owen Hyde Clark of the House of Worth to design her wedding dress, and promptly put his daughter on a diet so she would look sleek and slim on her wedding day. He relegated the incidental details to his future son-in-law, the decorator, who was eager to please his future father-in-law. Hicks decreed that everything should be white, all white, all white, from the mink cuffs on the bridal gown to the bridesmaids' coronets of hyacinth petals. As mother of the bride, Edwina was delighted to have her future son-in-law flying about attending to everything, said a friend, because she was already overexhausted planning her charity excursion to the Far East. She left a few days after the wedding and, sadly, died in her sleep on that trip while touring Borneo. The press coverage of the Mountbatten wedding conveyed the impression of a glorious union between the nobleman's daughter and the common but worthy man of her dreams. The bride's entrance into Romsey Abbey was heralded by trumpets playing "Oh, Perfect Love," and at the reception later, surrounded by members of the British and German royal families, the Duke of Edinburgh toasted the future of the bride and bridegroom. "As long as they produce children and keep the bloodline going," said Gwyn Robbins, "that's all that's required. Whether the bridegroom is homosexual, bisexual, or heterosexual doesn't matter. As long as the marriage looks good on the outside and is kept up for public appearances. It's worse for gay men within the aristocracy because it's the duty of the oldest male to produce an heir to pass on the family name, the property, and the title. So they've got to get married, no matter what their sexual orientation is, which accounts for the long-established tradition in Britain of homosexual men marrying women simply to breed. Makes no difference what they do later on, as long as they do it discreetly. That's the hypocrisy of it all." In his memoir, Palimpsest, writer Gore Vidal reflects on the homoerotic preference of men for each other that is accepted as a fact of life in Great Britain, especially in public schools. Most young men, particularly attractive ones, have sexual relations with their own kind, Vidal writes. "I suppose this is still news to those who believe in the two teams, straight, which is good and unalterable, queer, which is bad and unalterable unless it proves to be only a preference, which must then somehow be reversed, if necessary by force. Within the British aristocracy, marriage was the force. The love that dare not speak its name," was the way Oscar Wilde's young male lover had described men's sexual preference for one another in 1895. At that time, men like Oscar Wilde, who married women but loved men, were considered degenerates whose sexual acts were punishable by imprisonment. 65 years later, nothing had altered that concept in England, and in 1960, after the announcement of Princess Margaret's engagement, sexuality again became an issue. The whispering started soon after the Queen Mother announced her daughter's engagement and impending marriage in May. Ordinary people were pleased that the 29-year-old princess, who had partied aimlessly for 5 years since renouncing Peter Townsend, seemed to have finally found happiness. For the public, her marriage to a commoner would lower a class barrier between the monarchy and the people and bring them closer to the throne. For those within royal circles, the announcement caused an audible rumble in the tectonic plates that underpinned the British establishment. Not only was the Bohemian photographer a commoner whose parents were divorced, but he also had a mother who was Jewish. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant aristocracy hardly considered him an appropriate suitor for the daughter of a king and the sister of a queen, a royal princess who was fourth in line of succession to the throne. Princess Margaret has announced her engagement to Tony Armstrong Jones, wrote Noel Coward in his diary on February 28, 1960. Tony looks quite pretty, but whether or not the marriage is entirely suitable remains to be seen. He recorded further disapproval from the Duchess of Kent and Princess Alexandra. "They are not pleased over the engagement," he wrote. "There was a distinct froideur when I mentioned it." Ronald Armstrong Jones was shocked that his son was considering such a marriage. "I wish in heaven's name this hadn't happened," he said. "It will never work out. Tony's a far too independent sort of fellow to be subjected to discipline. He won't be prepared to play second fiddle to anyone. He will have to walk 2 steps behind his wife, and I fear for his future." Tony's closest friends agreed. "I sent a telegram," said classmate Jocelyn Stevens, a former magazine editor, and said, "Never has there been a more ill-fated assignment." The Times editorial page concurred. There is no recent precedent for the marriage of one so near to the throne outside the ranks of international royalty and the British peerage. Even the New Statesman, a liberal publication expected to be enthusiastic, withheld approval. The magazine said that the suitability of this particular commoner to become a member of the royal family must be judged with a leniency which only a few years before would have been unthinkable. The Queen was the first sovereign in 500 years. He's knocking down something. I don't know what it is. La la la. Where are we? The Queen was the first sovereign in 500 years to admit a commoner into her immediate family. She tried to remedy the situation by offering Mr. Armstrong Jones a title, but he refused. There is a note. When Angus Ogilvy, a commoner, married Margaret's cousin, Princess Alexandra, daughter of Marina, the Duchess of Kent, on April 24, 1963. He refused the Queen's offer of an earldom. "I don't see why I should get a peerage," said Ogilvy, "simply because I have married a princess." That's impressive, honestly. A year later, when his wife became pregnant, he decided he wanted his children to be titled, so he accepted the Queen's offer to become the Earl of Snowdon, also Viscount Linley of Nymans. The Manchester Guardian expressed a tinge of disappointment that the plain, honest Mr. Armstrong Jones should have a title thrust upon him. People said, the magazine, the newly minted peer had lost his appeal. As the husband of the Queen's sister, Tony Armstrong Jones had one very big claim on the sympathy of the British people. He had no handle to his name. He was, in fact, one of us. Now he has lost even that most precious asset, which was his birthright. Okay, I'm going to stop there for now because I don't know what, I think the rabbit just knocked over the ironing board. So I need to go deal with that. But I will be back. I'll just post this now because normally I record now to post in the wee hours in the morning, but I will just post this now and then I'll read again, and that will be for tomorrow. Okay, I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Bye.